Let's bring in Dan Perry. He was a chief editor for the Associated Press in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Dan, give us a sense of what it's like in Israel right now after the loss of those 12 kids in this latest airstrike. This attack, does it feel different than the others?
It kind of feels like something that would inevitably happen because of the Hezbollah paradigm of firing rockets at Israel. Eventually, there would be an unintended consequence of a lot of kids being killed or some such thing. I don't think Hezbollah escalated. It was just inevitable that after 9, almost 10 months of shelling of Israel, a particularly dire tragedy would happen. The question is, at this point, whether this entire model is acceptable. And I think for Israelis, they're weighing two competing narratives. One is that they understand that a more significant war against Hezbollah could involve more significant rocket fire against Israel, including against a huge population center of Tel Aviv. I understand that myself. I am in Tel Aviv, and I don't particularly want Hezbollah rockets aimed at my house. On the other hand, it clearly is completely unacceptable. And the sort of international discourse that we also lamentably see in the mainstream press about a tit for tat war of attrition and tribes squabbling is basically false. Israel is facing a complete and total outrage, where because of its complicated conflict with the Palestinians and Hamas in Gaza, it is facing a second front, not opening a second front. It was opened already against Israel. And the question is whether there is some optimal way to deal with it without, A, being unfair to the state of Lebanon, which is a failed state that can't control Hezbollah and itself probably has nothing to be punished for because they're hapless, and B, without triggering a major regional conflagration, which is in no one's interest. But the situation with Hezbollah firing at Israel daily, A, inevitably was going to lead to tragedy, and B, is just completely unacceptable as an element of the world order.
You touched on this a bit, but Benjamin Netanyahu has said that the retaliation for the attack would be harsh. Do most Israelis support retaliation, or do the concerns of a wider war outweigh the urge to seek vengeance?
They're split on how and whether the retaliation should be severe enough to risk the kind of regional conflagration and indeed attacks on the center of Israel that I mentioned myself. I do think, however, that the background, the foundational narrative in Israel is that this situation with Hezbollah can't really go on. And even if somehow there was a ceasefire in Gaza and Hezbollah would make good on its statements that in such a case they'd stop firing, I'm not so sure Israel can continue to tolerate an Iranian proxy terrorist militia a raid on its border, which, by the way, is a total violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 from 2006, where the entire world basically accepted that southern Lebanon should be under the control of the Lebanese army and that there should be no other armed force in Lebanon. Look, there's a wider thing here, and if I could just have a minute or two to explain what the stakes are and how crazy it all is. Iran has surrounded Israel with proxy militias that are basically terrorists, first and foremost, against the people they occupy. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syrian and Iraqi Shiite militias controlled by Iran, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank and Gaza, the Houthis to the south in Yemen. And this is aimed against Israel in the first instance, but largely it's an anti-Western alliance by Iran, a country that's about to become a nuclear threshold state, courtesy of Donald Trump, who pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. This cannot be left just to Israel to deal with. This should be treated by the West as a global emergency. NATO interfered in Bosnia and at Kosovo and less successfully in Afghanistan. I think Lebanon right now is an emergency for NATO and the West to deal with.
We are running out of time, but I appreciate you joining us. And I do want to mention as well, both the U.S., Israel blaming Hezbollah for the airstrike, the militant group as of this morning denying responsibility. Dan Perry, thank you again, though, for joining us. Appreciate your perspective in all of this.
It's a highly implausible denial, by the way.
Understood. All right, Dan Perry, thanks so much.